Hi, and welcome back to the Convergently Speaking podcast. This week I have an interview with my friend Carmen Bliss, counsellor and coach. I actually only met Carmen a few years ago when I was studying a conflict resolution unit at uni, and we quickly hit it off, realizing we had a lot of interests in common, but also life experiences in common. So I'm really excited to bring you this conversation today. We had a great time putting it together, and I was really humbled by the wisdom and experience that Carmen brought during our conversation. This was my first recorded interview over the internet, so it's still a bit of a learning experience for Caitlin and I. So bear with us as we fine-tune the audio for these type of interviews. That said, it was really fun, and I can't wait to do a few more of them. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Carmen Bliss. Hi, how are you, Carmen?
Hi, how you going, Dan?
This is cool. I'm really happy that we've managed to make this work.
Especially me too.
Yeah, especially with the end of year chaos, and we've been talking about it for ages, so it's really cool. I thought we might start just if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you and what do you do? And
yeah, no worries. So my name's Carmen Bliss, obviously. Thank you for introducing me. And my business is called Inspired Wellbeing Co. And basically I do counselling, workplace wellbeing and mindful parenting strategies. So that's where I'm at the moment. So yeah, and it's really good to talk to you, Dan. I know, like you said, we've been wanting to do it for ages. So it's good to finally be sitting down and chatting.
Yeah. Far out. I'm just thinking if I was someone listening in, you do a range of things. Like how did you come to end up doing those different things? Because they're not necessarily like a natural progression, like the workplace stuff and then the mindful parenting stuff. And
yeah, so it's a bit of a vast contrast between the three sort of satellites that I do work in. And I suppose it started from a positive psychology background. So I sort of started my career in the administration sort of business background, and then we actually had a bit of a personal tragedy, and it kind of turned my world upside down. We lost a child through stillbirth, and that actually gave me, I suppose, the change of life to be able to look at positive psychology. I did my diploma. And then from there, the business evolved. So I would call it, I suppose, post-traumatic growth rather than stress. So yeah, that's where the business was born from. And and here I am today. So the parenting stuff came first. I saw a need in the market and a need with my own child, my then 3-year-old daughter, who was having some behavioural issues, and thought there has to be a better way, and there has to be a way to be able to, I suppose, encourage her positively with her behaviours rather than the traditional sort of time-out punitive ways. So I applied some of the positive psychology strategies in my own life and to her. And yeah, then I thought, wow, this has really worked. I should be teaching this to other people because it's such a fantastic way of parenting, and the connection that you get with your kids from that is just amazing. So that's how the parenting part came about it. The counselling, as you know, Dan, I study with you at the moment. So that's always been a natural progression after that study of counselling and coaching. And then the workplace wellbeing came about because I was in a government job for 8 years, and huge need for well-being in the workplace, not just in government, but in small business as well. So that's when I decided I need to do something about this, and I need to inject some well-being into workplaces to help with employee retention and employees' satisfaction, work rate, efficiency, all of that. Because as you know, happy people work more efficiently. That's where that came about as well.
Wow. So all three things really come from your own lived experience.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think that's probably where the passion lies, I suppose.
I love that, because you can't teach that lived experience of someone. Like there's nothing better than it. Going back to, the first side of it all, you were talking about having an experience of, post-traumatic growth that came out of a highly stressful situation, losing a child. And then you talked about the positive psychology. I haven't actually talked about positive psychology on the podcast, but it may be good just to add a bit of context to how those two things connect. And because I know that it's not, we both know that it's not just hyper positivity saying, oh, I had a bad experience, now I'm going to pretend everything's okay. Do you want to unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for mentioning that, Dan, because you're exactly right. People hear the term positive psychology and they think, happy clapping in the park sort of stuff. So it's definitely not that. And it works on principles around our emotions, principles around our relationships. And it's actually about evaluating what's going on in those areas of our lives and what are the positive aspects of those areas of our lives that we can actually improve on. So rather than looking at the weaknesses in our life, we look at the strengths in our life and do more of those things. That time for me in my life was hugely stressful. I ended up with some post-traumatic stress disorder and some anxiety disorder, a little bit of panic attacks thrown in there for good measure. But working through that and healing through that gave me the insight into how we can integrate more meaning into our life every day in our small tasks, not thinking about, I suppose, the big picture, like I want to save the world, but more thinking about, okay, so what's the meaning in my life in the small tasks? Why is it that I do these things every day? What does that mean in my life in the grand scheme of things? So the positive psychology aspect, I suppose, is working on all those things that make up well-being in your life.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. I mean, I know about some of this stuff, but just to hear you lay it all out like that, it's really cool. So yeah, it's not so much focusing on, it's not focusing on the negative and denying that. It's incorporating that, but also knowing where, what'll be healthy and positive to focus on to get. It's sort of like a self-perpetuating thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
if I
definitely.
focus on these things, I'll get more meaning.
Yeah, definitely. And look, there are some foundation and principles around it. So I don't know whether you're aware, and maybe the listeners might want to look it up, but Martin Seligman is the man that sort of founded positive psychology. And there's a huge amount of research that's gone into it. So he spent many, many years researching all around the world, not just in America where he's from, but all different countries, sort of researching what it means to have that sense of satisfaction and meaning and a flourishing sort of life, and what are the aspects that make you flourish in life. So that's where the principles come from, and he developed some tools around that. So yeah,
I'm remembering, and I want to hear like some of those principles and tools, but I'm remembering now from when I studied positive psychology that he actually had like a long career prior in a more traditional psychology kind of space, studying and looking at pathology and all of that, which I found really contextualized it all. Because once again, it's not like he's this person that's permanently orientated to only looking at the good, as we see this temperament in some people. But you've probably read deeper into it than I have. But the impression I got was like it was a trying to do the best work he could and help people the most. He naturally his thinking evolved into the looking at and studying the positive as he realized that hadn't really been studied before.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. And you're right on the money there, Dan. He was a psychologist before he just started discovering the positive psychology aspects and researching into that. So his foundations were in traditional psychology. So yeah, it does. It makes for a good basis, and through his practice, he noticed the things that would change the psychology of people into a more positive, flourishing life, and that piqued his interest, obviously, and he started researching around that.
Yeah, cool. So tell us a bit more about your mindfulness parenting, and because I know that integrates with the positive psychology, so it's like the basis for it.
Definitely. Yeah. So I have an aspect of my business, like I mentioned before, called mindful parenting, and I said before it was born out of a need because my daughter had the behavioural issues, like not sitting, go somewhere and she doesn't get in her car seat for 15 minutes, and there's a big screaming tantrum.
Yeah, we've experienced that.
Yeah, and I was just finding that I've got an 11-year-old son as well, but he was very introverted, and he didn't display the same sort of tantrums that my daughter did. So thinking about that and thinking about her personality, so she's very emotive outwardly. So, and I'm very introverted, so I needed to find a way to be able to support her in her emotiveness without dampening it, with a way to support her and a way to bring my son's emotions out a little bit more as well, because there's that balance. So drawing on the positive psychology framework, I started thinking about, okay, how can I be a value to both of my children and nurture their emotions without using punishment, but also keeping the respectful boundaries, obviously, that kids need. So I thought about those principles and how I would use those. So I started using what's called a time in instead of a time out. So that's where I started, and we now have evolved to teaching other parents how to recognize. Well, first of all, we teach them about self-care, because as you know, Dan, as a mother or a father or even a grandparent caring for their children, we don't do self-care well. We think it's selfish and we don't prioritize ourselves. And I suppose that part of the positive psychology is filling up our own cups first. And self-care doesn't mean massage or, going out with friends or whatever. It's deeper than that. It's working on ourselves. It's taking the time out to rejuvenate our energy, thinking about the energy that we bring into every situation. Self-care could mean therapy, it could mean counselling, it could mean making sure you exercise, eat well, all of that sort of stuff. So we teach about that first, and then we actually look at the child's emotions and the development of the child's brain. So in a positive psychology way, we talk to our parents about how the child's brain develops, which I think is really important, and we don't get a manual when we have these children. You would know, Dan, you've got children as well. So after we give birth or become a new father, we don't get this sort of handout that goes with it, how to raise a child successfully. And we can only go on our own experiences. So I teach them about the child development and the brain and how the brain reacts when they're having those tantrums. And we talk about how that actually works from a parenting point of view, so relaying information or connecting with the child or naming emotions. I don't know about you, Dan, but when I grew up, we didn't really talk about emotions. We didn't name them. I would never have said, I'm feeling angry.
No, we didn't either.
Yeah, so that's that's the basis of teaching emotional intelligence to children, basically. So and then we move on to some strategies around how to integrate that into your everyday life and how to integrate resilience into your children, because children are not as resilient as they used to be, and I'm not sure why. But we teach that as well. So it's just a nice package to be able to help parents, give them the toolbox that they need, I suppose.
Yeah, wow. So obviously the toolbox worked for you on the front end. Yeah, and that sort of sold it to you, and you thought, so what made you, how did you go from, I want to use this for myself? Because a lot of people will be like, cool, I've got this thing, I'm using it for myself, and go along with their life. How did you switch to thinking, oh, actually, I want to do this, I want to actually teach this? Have you always had an impulse to teach or to help, or was that new for you?
I think the impulse has always been there. I've always been sort of like a natural leader in my, business and admin. Always been sort of a forward thinker, I suppose you could say. Perhaps in your terms, Dan, intuitive thinking.
Yes.
So I think it was a natural progression. My business was in its infancy, and I really wanted to pass on some of this knowledge because, I would see sort of parents really struggling, or, my friends would say, oh my gosh, like parenting, it's so hard. I've never got any time for myself. My child's always having a tantrum, or, all of that stuff. So I think it was just a natural progression, and I started with like a free workshop for the community. And I touched on a couple of the subjects, and I got a really good response. I had 20 people to my first workshop, which really freaked me out as an introvert, but I got there. And from there it turned into sort of a 4-week course that was live, online through Zoom. So that's how it sort of happened, I suppose.
Yeah, that's great. So to put you on the spot, I'd love to hear a story, some sort of a story of, it could be yourself or someone you've worked with, one of your clients, around some of this positive parenting, mindful parenting, some of the principles actually, being used. Have you got any cool stories about how people have applied it?
Yeah, of course. So like, I had a client that had a 3.5-year-old, I think she was, and she was just acting out all the time. So, you can imagine as a parent, the terrible twos or the terrible threes, or whatever, three-nager or whatever we say. So, the child was not expressing emotions, just crying erratically quite often, and the mum was just kind of exhausted of it, I suppose, and going, thinking about them going into kindy, in the next sort of 6 to 8 months. They were thinking, okay, we kind of need to get this under control, I suppose, before they go. The child had been socialised, etc., so it wasn't about that side of it. It was more about some needs that weren't getting met. And when we talk about needs that aren't getting met, that has an effect on emotional development. So that's where the tantrums come in, etc. So the child, the parent started the course, and we sort of do a check-in every week and see how they go. And the child, gradually stopped doing these sort of throw herself on the floor tantrums.
Yeah.
So what those principles behind that is actually getting down and connecting with the child in those moments of distress, meeting the need that is unmet. So it might be tired, might be hungry, might be personal connection. So energy she's getting from her mum or dad.
Yeah.
So meeting the need without complications. So without actually explaining yourself, because a child in that moment can't actually retain any information. Their brain has literally shut down.
Yeah, that's been helpful for us to learn and realise.
Yes. Can't take in any new information. So rather than try to, discuss what's going on or ask them what's going on, you do the connection first. So down on their level, connect physically. If they won't let you physically connect, because sometimes they don't, at the end of when you're learning, they probably will, because they get used to it. So just being on their level and saying, I'm here when you're ready. I notice that you're feeling really sad. Just leave it at that. They'll come to you, and, the more times you practice that, they will come quicker. They will, come for that emotional support. And then we meet the need that's unmet. So whether it be food or sleep or connection, we generally do some activities in that time. So this mum found that over the course of the 4 or 5 weeks, her daughter went from, a screaming mess on the floor to coming to her and saying, Mummy, I'm feeling sad. And then they would do some colouring in and do that connection or get a snack or whatever. So that's huge for a parent to go from not understanding their child and why they're in a tantrum state quite often, to actually connecting with their child and having that behaviour disappear.
Huge to see that transformation of behaviour, and also huge to hear a human learning to be in touch with their emotional state so quickly that she could actually say, I'm sad. I think about all the adults I know, myself included, that have had to learn as an adult what's happening emotionally. There's an emotion, what is it, and being able to verbalize and express that. Sounds like a child can learn that a lot quicker than an adult. You're saying like it took only a month for her. Obviously sadness is only one emotion, but that's really cool.
And so at that age we only teach 4 emotions. Because, within the course that we run, we teach, in the developmental stages of the child, they can only recognize those 4 emotions. And then, as they progress, as they get older, you add more in, as it might be frustrated or might be surprised or something like that. So, but for a 3-year-old or 3.5-year-old, that's, the 4 emotions are definitely enough.
And does that include parents setting an example by expressing their own emotions?
Yeah, most definitely, Dan. That is another part of the course, is understanding what our triggers are, understanding what our emotions are, because sometimes as parents, we don't actually understand that ourselves.
Sure. Yeah. And we react, they react, and it quickly spirals. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So it's about connection rather than reaction, and understanding your own triggers is really important in the part of that journey. And along with that comes recognizing our own emotions and actually expressing them verbally to our children as well. Growing up, I didn't see my parents display any sort of hard emotions, sadness, anger, etc. So those were never modeled to me, and it might be the same for you or the listeners, or it might have been the extreme way. They were expressed all of the time, and there was no joy or happiness. So for us to understand how to express our own emotions is really important too. And it might just be simple as saying, I'm really happy today that we're at the park. and just dropping it in normal conversation. Or, mummy feels really sad that, I didn't get my letter on time, or, something along those lines.
Yeah, no, that's like, this is all stuff we've been journeying with ourselves. And I think Caitlin's always been a step ahead of me in some of this stuff, because she got, her family wasn't perfect by any means growing up, but there was a general level of emotional connection and emotional intelligence that, or in a way that I didn't have it. I think we probably both had different things, but yeah. So this sentiment of validating emotions and expressing emotions. So I've watched her, and I do it now as well with the kids, that rather than going to shame or to guilt when they do something wrong, or even if they make a mistake and they break something accidentally, I've watched Caitlin many times say, I'm feeling really frustrated that ... or, when you did that, I felt sad. But doing it from not reactive, but doing it from a very congruent state, but actually to show the kid that I'm actually a human and I actually feel things. That's pretty groundbreaking for me to observe that, because I do that as well. I'm often someone who likes to naturally present as being real and being human. But when it comes to parenting, you're like, oh, how perfect am I meant to present versus how many of the struggles and challenges that are actually going on in the background.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think we discount kids for not understanding probably the level that we do, but they actually understand a lot more than what we think. And, even the energy that represents, when we, bring home crazy energy, we've had a crazy day or a really stressful day, bringing that energy into the house. I don't know whether you've noticed, Dan, but if you bring that energy yourself, your kids pick up on that really quickly, and either become hyperactive or whingy, or so it's about knowing our own energy as well as the emotions that go with it. So
and acknowledging that that's there rather than pretending it's not, which creates this incongruence. That's been another thing. It's like, well, if the energy's there, they're going to feel it.
Yeah.
So there's no point in pretending it's there, because it's almost like gaslighting them.
Exactly.
We're saying everything's good, but at a invisible level, intangible level, they know something's not.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Dan. So it is about being a little bit more real, and if it's something that you don't think is appropriate for the children, maybe taking 5 minutes and regrounding our energy and coming into that situation a little bit differently. Not that we're pretending that nothing's wrong, but perhaps the issue is unexplainable to a child.
Yes. Yeah.
Those situations do occur as well. But, the situations where the emotions are mild enough for the child to understand and take that on, definitely being real and explaining that to the child as well.
And I suppose that would be tag teaming then with your partner.
Yeah,
so
most
definitely. If you need time out or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
This reminds me, before the call, we were thinking about possible topics, and it seems like a natural segue into this topic that we've discussed offline in the past of personal development and how that works within a relationship, and how, I know Caitlin and I spoke a little bit about this on the podcast, how we try and keep each other, like bring each other along in what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to hear some of your experiences, like working as a coach and a counsellor, because it's something I'm still nutting out. How do we keep relationships healthy whilst also growing and developing?
Yeah, for sure. And you're right, it is sort of a natural segue, because that parenting stuff has to be consistent. from both parents, and that is one big aspect that we teach is the relationship and what that looks like, and how that feeds into the parenting, and what energy is that relationship bringing into the house. And I suppose for the partners to understand what you're learning and how to integrate it themselves, and also knowing their triggers and stuff, which is more about that personal development stuff that you're talking about, Dan, that growth within oneself to understand what it is that drives them, what it is that drives their reactions, what are their triggers, how they speak to people, the energy that they bring, or, perhaps the trauma in the background that perhaps hasn't been addressed and is sitting underneath there. And I think, yes, it's quite difficult to be on the same level as your partner, husband or wife or whatever, because we all grow and develop at different stages. And I suppose, in a partnership, I know myself, I've struggled with growing more than my husband, not to discount his growth, because he is definitely growing as well, but perhaps just not as fast as me. And that can be challenging at times, because we have these expectations of each other.
And we got this advantage that we work in this space, so we're just exposed. I get to sit in lectures and be exposed to ideas and theories that my wife running around after the kids just can't. And I'm sure your husband is similar, that he's at work and he doesn't work in this kind of space, does he? He's in a totally different industry. So
so you're exactly right. You and I are exposed to this discussions, these ideas, these sort of growth opportunities every single day, and we work in the space, we study in the space, and you and I are friends, Dan. We socialize in this space.
Sure.
Yeah, it becomes a different world, I suppose.
So how do we bring the partners in then? Like, how do we do that? I mean, I know, and I also don't know. It's something I'm still trying to work out and trying to sort out in my own mind. And I suppose a related question, not that you have all the answers, but I'd just love to hear your thoughts, is what's going on with men? Because it's nearly always the women, or what's going on with women versus, it's nearly always the mums. The theme I've seen is women having kids, and then at some point in that process after having kids, having a real significant shift. And it seems, as an outsider looking in, it's almost like a rite of passage, having a child for a woman. It's not exclusively the case, but often it's the female that then says, I'm going to find my own voice and identity and career or whatever. I'm going to do my healing. And it's the husband that's lagging behind or kicking up a fuss or something.
There's no easy answer to that, Dan.
Come on.
Thank you for bringing it up. So I think, the start of that journey is, how do we bring our partners along for that ride of growth? And for me, it's modeling. My husband seeing me grow in my business, grow personally, is motivation enough for him to want to grow and explore himself as well. So, he might not listen to all the crazy podcasts that I do, or, attend crazy free training, about obscure topics like I do. But he is absorbing the information sort of every time my mouth opens, and every time we have a discussion, or, every time my business grows or something like that. So, he's seeing how much I'm growing and how much I'm, I suppose, bringing some more joy into that growth. And he's incrementally changing and growing as well. And I suppose, as the person that's growing, quicker, we have to be really mindful not to place expectations on the other person. Because
Yes.
that can be a real trap. You know, we expect them to be where we are and on the level of understanding that we are, and it's frustrating perhaps that they're not. But you know, it's hard enough to change yourself, let alone change somebody else. So
yeah.
they change themselves, and yeah.
And we always project, like Caitlin and I talked about this, you know, we can project onto the other person how we think they should do it. And it's usually kind of similar to what we did because, you know, that worked for us. And I remember Caitlin was saying on the podcast how she realized that although she might be interested or supportive of some of the people I follow, that was not necessarily her journey and they're not necessarily her teachers. And I realized at the end of that podcast, the good way to sum it up was really that you're on the same trajectory, even if you're not taking the same path to that end space. Is this something that you find is an issue with people that you're coaching and counseling, and even I suppose you get exposed to relational dynamics a lot in the mindful parenting course?
Yeah. It is something that I'm exposed to through my coaching and counseling, and definitely in the mindful parenting. You know, I find that the people that are attracted to my business, who want to come and have coaching with me, are generally people that are starting their journey to growth. So these sort of issues will come up. You know, they want to improve their well-being, and you know, sometimes the relationships aren't open to that growth, and therefore they're seeking some validation that their growth is okay. For like, that's the first priority. You know, sometimes they think, okay, maybe I shouldn't be sort of growing this way or exploring these options.
What a great way to frame it. The relationship's not open to that growth. It kind of externalizes the relationship as its own entity, which I love. I love to think about. I read a book some years back now called the Zim-Zum of Love.
Okay.
And the Zim-Zum was basically the way that the author and his wife, that wrote it together, talked about the third entity of the relationship. Seems a lot less adversarial than, you know, if you'd said, oh, their partner's not open to growth, but the relationship as a whole is not open.
I think it's important to think about the relationship as a separate entity, because otherwise we get too personal. You know, it becomes an attack rather than an observation of the growth. So I think, you know, working with the people that come to me and working with them about being open, understanding boundaries, but also understanding expectations of themselves and others, is really important. So, and that includes their relationships as well.
So is it always a recipe for an end to the relationship, or do you, because I've seen it a lot, not always, but it's I'm wondering what are the values and the tools, because obviously you usually only work with one person out of a two-person entity. How do you go about that?
I think it's about working with the person that's in front of you, Dan. And I think I don't think relationships need to end, or it needs to come to that. If the person sitting in front of you is starting their journey to growth, then that includes, I suppose, evaluating their relationship and what that relationship means to them and what it brings for them. Because we all have, I suppose, moments in our relationships where we think, okay, maybe this is not for me. And, you know, I've been with my husband for 18 years now, so that's, you know, quite a long time. So I understand the trials and tribulations of getting to that point. I think the most, if the core love is still there, but all of the things around that are not quite lining up, I think that that's a recipe to work through. I think it can be explored and it can be guided and worked through. I don't think you need to, sort of part ways. Obviously, it's another whole nother topic if the core love is lost, I suppose.
Sure.
And it's about the person understanding themselves like as a full, like whole sort of person, and what they bring to the relationship. So yeah, that's a tricky question, but yeah, I think it's about being really, really open and lots of communication. I don't think any of us would still be in a relationship if we didn't work on our communication every day.
Yeah, and that's right. And there's obviously people that are quote unquote in a relationship, but in every metric they're really not. The communication stopped and the intimacy's gone and that kind of thing. My question or my perspective isn't necessarily that it's by default bad if the relationship's to end. It's more around I think you, like me, got a bit of an optimism as to what can be achieved when using the right tools, and so that's why we get into this kind of work. We believe people are capable of quite a lot, and I suppose I felt really sad to be exposed to relationship issues that people around me are going through right at the end, and then realized, a lot of this was down to one person growing and the other person not growing. And it seems like personal growth is such a joy and such a positive thing. It's sad if it creates this rift. And so as we've discussed offline before, it's like how early intervention is probably the language, early intervention for relationships, because people obviously get together because they love each other and presumably want to stay together. So that's why I'm putting you on the spot, trying to mine your brain, because I'm still mulling it all over.
Yeah. And you're right, it is about early intervention, Dan, and I think being able to be open enough to recognize the signs that perhaps, the couple needs something external to themselves to be able to contextualize or put in to perception of what's going on. I think sometimes we feel shame about what's going on, and we just keep it in-house for so long, then it's too late.
Yeah.
Which kind of comes back to removing that shame around counselling and therapy and stuff, and being able to sort of seek help when needed, rather than feel as though it's shameful to need help.
And it also comes back to emotional intelligence skills that you're teaching the next generation, so that hopefully in 20 years' time, these people that are kids now, when they're in relationships, will actually be able to express what's happening in real time, rather than keeping it. What was the language you used? Like underground, or keeping it?
Yeah, in-house.
Yeah, in-house. Yeah.
That is what I'm passionate about, Dan. I can see the next generation becoming far more emotionally intelligent than we are or were. And that's what I, get really passionate about, is teaching parents to teach their children this emotional intelligence. You look at sort of people in the media or people in the government that have absolutely no emotional intelligence, if one extreme to another. You look at Donald Trump, who has no emotional intelligence whatsoever, and then you look at the beautiful Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, and her emotional intelligence is off the scale. So and it's represented in the way the country's run. That's a huge example, but that's what I'm passionate about, changing the language that we use around emotions. And I hope that changes, obviously, the mental health of our people that we're raising.
Yeah, it's almost like, I think for a lot of us that have baby boomers as parents, or that sort of there might be some of the older Gen X as well. We didn't really get that, because it was almost like a virtue to be able to be stoic and tough, which is understandable for a generation that were children of people that lived through war. And it's a coping mechanism to cut off and disassociate from the emotion. So it's not a judgment, but for those of us that have that sort of age group as parents, we didn't get those skills, and so now we're retroactively some of us at least, I think a lot are retroactively trying to learn and develop a language we didn't get given and some skills we didn't get given, and speaking for myself, do it clumsily at times. So even with our clumsy efforts, I can see that just pursuing that can have a beautiful effect on our children. And I can't really imagine what it would be like to have our children when they become parents. And that's just, when they were 1 and 2 and 3, they learnt to express that they're feeling sad or angry or frustrated. And as you say, when they get a little bit older, they get a few more words in that vocabulary. So when they're an adult, they actually have a full emotional array of a full emotional vocabulary. So that sounds like that's a lot of what your passion, what's pushing you forward.
Yeah, definitely, Dan. And our society is very segregated at the moment. We're not very connected as beings. We have that stoicism, and that has come from the generations before us, and we've kind of built walls around ourselves. And I suppose developing the emotional intelligence is taking down those walls again, building that community again, and having that human connection that I suppose has almost been I don't want to say erased, because that's the wrong word, but it has been sort of phased out. And we sort of live in brick houses and throw stones sometimes, and I'd really like those walls to come down in the future generations and have that human connection and belonging and sense of community come back, which again forms our meaning for life.
Yeah. Well, so much of our meaning comes from the quality of our relationships.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Better or worse. Yeah. The question I'm wondering about, because I think probably people listening in, any of us that are parents and we're all wondering, how the hell others are doing it. And I'd love to hear, I know you're interested in workplace well-being, and a lot of that's grounded in being a whole and balanced, living a balanced life. I'd love to hear either your own experiences or just that wisdom you've picked up along the way of how to balance all that stuff, because you've clearly got a lot going on.
Yeah, it's I describe it, I suppose, Dan, as a a bit of a roller coaster, which I suppose life is, really, isn't it?
Yes.
I've been on a roller coaster for the last 3 years, and I've had some pretty low moments, dealing with PTSD and the panic disorder and that sort of stuff, and trying to work through that. But I suppose, and yes, I am a busy mum, fitting lots of stuff in. The way that I cope is making sure I work on my self-care every single day. That is a non-negotiable for me in my life, and everyone's self-care looks different. And it's about, I suppose, coming out of your mind and into your body and understanding what your body wants, what it needs to be able to actually function properly every day. For me, that's good nutrition. For me, that's moving my body every day, whether it's a gentle walk or whether it's going to Pilates or something like that. For me, it's, making sure I get to bed on time, because I know for me that I don't function on not much sleep.
Yeah.
It's about putting boundaries in place, having the ability to say no when I need to, which I know that, all of my clients struggle with. huge. You would know yourself, Dan, putting those boundaries in actually takes a lot of self-worth and a lot of self-confidence to be able to actually say, no, you know what, that doesn't fit in with me and my self-care right now. But having the confidence to do that is definitely something that we all have to work on. And also, having therapy, I see a counsellor regularly. That's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be, it's a good thing. It's
sure.
Opening us up to the possibilities of more in life, and looking at perhaps critically what's going on in our life and how we can work on that or correct it. So for me, it's about balancing all of that together, and being really connected to the people I love is really important as well. So, yes, I may work, at the moment I'm working 3 jobs, which is ridiculous. But, that's in perfect balance. I work in my own job. I have a little part-time job, and I do some cash work as well. So, but that's in balance. And I say no to things that perhaps overload that balance. I think it's being really self-aware, Dan, about what that balance is for you in this time in your life. And you've been through similar situations to me with the health stuff, the energy levels. Managing that, it's a day-to-day thing, and but really establishing those boundaries and self-care rules, I suppose, rules for life.
And I'm guessing you tell me if I'm wrong, but working for yourself is probably, well, I know it's a meaningful thing, and therefore that's probably not draining in the same way as other things. I know for me a big part is knowing what's draining and how draining it is. So I can work in one role and it will be more tiring than another role.
And that's getting back to I suppose we've done like a full circle, Dan, the positive psychology aspects of understanding what your strengths are, because those strengths and what you do with those strengths, like, owning your own business or in counselling, or, knowing what your strengths are, it might be, that you're really good at marketing or something like that. They give us energy. And, you know that working in your own business gives you energy. For me, I worked stupidly in the government for 8 years, which drained my energy. It really did. It sucked the energy out of me. And now I'm doing things that I love in every aspect of the jobs that I'm in. So I've actually got more energy for life, even though I'm probably working harder. Those energy levels have definitely increased, which makes me more available for my family too.
Yes. Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it? It's like when you're more present in what you're doing at work because you like it, then you can also be more present at home because you've been rejuvenated, and it's like a beautiful yin yang.
Yeah, for sure.
That's what I find. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I find it's a good tiredness as well. Like, I mean, as an introvert relating to people, in most of the roles I find myself in, I'm relating to people. That's tiring, but it's a good tiring. It feels similar to doing a few hours of work in the backyard and physically using my body. You get in and you have a big glass of water, and it's like a good tide. It feels like a good tide for me. Whereas other roles I've been in that haven't fitted me as well, it's just exhausting and draining, and it doesn't really give me much back.
I think it's about being satisfied, that tiredness that you talk about, it has a satisfaction at the end of it. Whereas, perhaps the other roles that we play that aren't aligning with us as well, it's more of an exhaustion, which is hard to cope with.
Yeah, I like that, satisfied. That's a good way to word it. Yeah, and that comes from the meaning. So we're full circle again, when you find meaning in what you do. All this is making me think I really need to do a podcast specifically on self-care and really delve into that, maybe an interview or, not quite sure, but so important. And also the setting boundaries. one anecdote from my own life that it's at front of mind now because I was telling someone about it just the other day and I'd forgotten about it. Was I was seeing a physio who's far more than a physio. He's trained in other kind of energetic, therapeutic kind of modalities, and I went and saw him. A friend of mine had recommended him, so I went and saw him some years back now. And we're talking about boundaries, and I found myself saying at one point, well, I'm really good at setting boundaries, like what you're talking about, your energy levels and knowing what I had that all sorted out. I knew that if I say yes to this, it will quickly increase my stress load, and within a few weeks I'm going to have to pull way back because I'm going to be more worn out. Or I can say yes to this other thing, but I can only say yes a few times, and all that very nuanced understanding about how to manage my energy levels. But what he helped me pick up on was there was an incongruence that was happening. Whilst I was able to say no, I'd learnt the skill of saying no in the outside world to all these things, which was great. There was like an inner parenting, inner child dynamic where little Dan, or little Daniel, because I was always Daniel as a kid, little Daniel was scared that saying no would mean I'd be rejected, I'd lose connection, I'd lose friends, I'd lose relationship, I'd lose love. And so that was just a really eye-opening experience that I had, that we can learn boundaries, but we also need to learn we also need to change our internal stories to be congruent with our external actions.
Yeah, for sure. And do you know what, Dan, that is what's happening with most of the clients I see. They have an incongruence with, what they want to feel, and the boundaries that they need to set, but the self-worth behind that, plays a massive aspect into what they want to achieve, and are they worthy? Am I worthy of this?
Well, that's what triggered the story in my head when you said the self-worth and all of that. We might wind up soon, but I'd love to ask you, what sort of tools are you using? Are you finding a good working with people around self-worth? And because, we're talking about really slippery, vague things here. Not, it's one thing to go home and, put in a plan of goal 1, goal 2, goal 3 that you had happen in therapy. But it's another thing to go home and say, oh, I'm going to increase my self-worth this week. How do we do that? How do you do that with people?
Look, it's so individual, and different people respond to different tools, I suppose. Number one is really challenging those negative thoughts that come into your mind. That is my number one tool for people. Challenge those ugly thoughts that come in, because we all have them, and unfortunately some are like an unweeded garden, and they're out of control, and we need to bring that control back and actually challenge them. And the second thing, I suppose, is around starting to trust yourself, because when we have little self-worth, we don't trust ourselves. We don't use our intuition to trust ourselves and trust our decisions and stuff like that. So, start to do some things like, free writing exercises. I've had a couple of clients who have really struggled to even just get pen to paper. Which is completely natural, but it's because they don't trust themselves, and don't trust the process. And those clients are fully journaling now, so and that's about building that self-worth as well. So it's like I said, it's individual, but little things, and having the power to set boundaries is another one. Start really, really small, with setting some really small boundaries, and work your way up, and that actually empowers us as people to start putting those things in place. So that's just a couple of suggestions.
Yeah, no, it is empowering, isn't it? It's self-perpetuating. That's what Caitlin and I have found. You set a boundary, feels good. It changes the dynamics in a relationship when you do it, in a healthy, respectful way. And you end up with better relationships, and you end up with more energy and more, not just energy, but like vitality. You're not running constantly on empty.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think you and I could probably talk all day about all of this.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, it's so much to talk about, and so much knowledge behind us.
And it will be great to have you come back again, because our issue wasn't so much what can we talk about, but what what of the multitude of topics. So yeah, it'd be great to have you come back again in the future. And thanks for making the time today. It's been a bit of a learning process for the two of us to do this over video, so it's been cool. I always like trying something new.
Thanks for having me on, Dan. I really appreciate it, and I'm an avid listener to your podcast. So.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's good. At least I got one.
So yeah, it's been really nice chatting, and I definitely hope to come back on and we'll explore another topic.
Sounds good.
Thanks for listening today. I hope you enjoyed the interview with Carmen, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon on the Convergently Speaking podcast.